Ladies and gents, boys and girls, pronouns of your choosing, welcome back to the Firefighters Podcast. Today on the podcast, we are going on a whistle-stop tour of the skills, techniques, tactics, and teamwork that is involved in the rest of the team of UKISAR on their deployment in Kosovo 2022. We are going to be learning a little bit more about different members of the team and some of their partners as well, and understanding how this all comes together to enable UK International Search and Rescue to deliver on an international stage. Today's episode is supported by two of our partners, first of which is Willingwood Watches, the creators of those beautiful luxury watches made from upcycled firefighting equipment. Willingwood Watches has been with us since the beginning of the podcast, and we continue to grow and support each other for two very important reasons. Number one is the authenticity. So both myself and Johnny Garrett, the founder of Willingwood Watches, are both head over heels in love with the sector, and working with Willingwood Watches allows me to keep a piece of fire service memorabilia and ultimately the pulse of the fire service on my wrist wherever I go. Their luxury upcycled watches have so many incredible aspects that really encapsulate some of the best parts of the fire service. Whether it's the straps that are made from upcycled fire hoses, these have served at least 10 years on the front line in the British fire service, which makes all of them absolutely unique, and also the different individual parts of the watch themselves. If you ever click on the link in the notes of this podcast, you'll be able to head over to willingwoodwatches.com. You'll see a whole host of watches over there, from the Valiant collection, the Bronze collection, and my personal favorite, which is the Triumph collection. Triumph collection is the most prestigious of the watches, I will give you that. And it's available in three different colors, which is the Oxygen Blue, the Fuel White, and the Heat Red. The watch has got sub-dials inspired by the dashboard of the fire engine. Hands of the watch are paying homage to the gauges of the water pumps, and the antique brass-plated chronograph buttons, and the one-of-a-kind fire alarm-inspired case back. This particular one comes presented in their luxury fire alarm presentation box. Now, if you go over and have a look at the website, it really is a whole experience when you unbox one of these watches. Now, I'm not going to do it justice, but we will drop a link to one of the videos in the notes below, so go on and have a look at willingwoodwatches.com. I've had my watch now for about 3 years. I absolutely love it. I get no end of comments about it. And Johnny and the team are right there ready to give you that same experience. And our second part of the podcast is for those who are looking to upskill themselves at the very best facilities in the UK. Is IRRTC, which stands for the International Road Rescue and Trauma Consultancy. This is an international team of specialists who are raising the game for all members of UK Fire and Rescue Services as they specialise in transport-related vehicle extrication and trauma training to a worldwide audience. Now, yes, they have ran courses for pretty much every fire service in the UK. It is also useful across a massive range of sectors. So yes, the emergency services responders and training departments, but security and close protection teams as well, organisations working in remote locations, as well as military, civilian, medical organisations, and so many more. Some of the big things happening over at IRRTC at the minute are their new trench rescue technician courses, their heavy vehicle rescue, their specialist responder advanced courses, and also their CPD, which comes in so many variations. You can find out more about IRRTC by heading over to the website at irrtcrescue.com, and they are also now the approved trainer for UKRO. Now, for those of you that are unaware, UKRO is the United Kingdom Rescue Organisation, and they have been raising rescue standards throughout the UK for many, many years. They are bringing together UK's fire services, developing their skills, and serving the public. IRRTC are actually the first approved training providers that will deliver the training on behalf of UKRO. This is a massive deal. So again, if you want to get access to the level of training that is actually training the people at the tip of the sword, people competing in UKRO, then head on over to irrtcrescue.com. Well, folks, that's our names in the frames for today's episode. So let's jump in there with the rest of the members from UK International Search and Rescue. Once again, this is going to be a whistle-stop tour, and then we're going to box it off right at the end and draw a line under UKISAR's training in Kosovo early this year. We are going to be touching base with the team more and more throughout the year. And once again, it's going to be a common theme of the podcast to get these short, sharp insights into some of the incredible people that are working on the front line, keeping everybody safe. So without further ado, if you're sitting comfortably, let's buckle up for safety, and I'll see you all on the other side.
Don Mabbott, part of the ISAR team with the LFB, and I am the Deputy Team Leader of Logistics. Okay, so logistics basically carries all the equipment in a cache that we need. There's around about 13 tonnes. Because we are predominantly flying overseas or maybe transit via LGVs, we can't take everything that we use for urban search and rescue at home. Because of that, we have to pick and choose wisely what we can carry. Due to a lot of the shipping conditions, we can't take large hydraulics, so they have to be replaced with electronics. Mm-hmm. I think the common misconception within some of the teams within UKISAR is that we carry all the equipment that we have on our modules back at home. So there's a lot of confusion when they ask for equipment that we don't have. But I think predominantly the electrical equipment we have replacing, especially hydraulics are so much more versatile, not always lighter, but the amount of equipment we have to take to power the hydraulics, is ridiculous. So it brings the weight down. It makes it more user friendly. Yeah, those air mats aren't all they're made up to be honest. Yeah, very slippery, and I did end up sliding outside of my shelter. But yeah,
I think you were pushed.
probably, yeah. But yeah, I think actually it's good to experience this. I have done outdoor training, winter training previously, but this had a slightly different twist to it. This was rescue orientated and survival orientated, and I think I fared okay. It was cold at times, but I think something you said about Sarah and having her stuff all squared away. I know when Sarah come and joined the team, she said she's got a lot to learn. But it turns out, looking at how Sarah packs her gear and how she's ready on the moment, I've had a lot to learn as well. So it's been a good learning experience too. I did numerous exercises last year with the Kimber stands and the one in Bury in Manchester, and it opened my eyes, like I said, to the fact that a lot of people believe that we carry more equipment than we do. My advice to anyone who's unsure, come have a look at logistics, have a look at what we've got. But if you're out on deployment or even exercises, get us down there. We're all rescue trained. Every single person in logistics is a rescue technician. Get us down there and have us as your right-hand person that can advise you on what equipment you'll need for your next stage, for whether it be shoring, breaching and braking, because we can advise you of what we got there and then as you're making your plan, rather than you making a plan and having to adjust. We could work with a heavy deployment, we can work 2 work sites, 24 hours a day at the same time, yet we're still limited with kit. And when you have got 2 work sites, everybody's trying to get hands on that kit.
So everybody is their priority. This is the most important thing going on right now.
That's right. The worst thing you can do is basically grab kit, take everything you think you may need, when actually what we want you to do is take what you need here and now. And also, we can advise you on what we've got when we don't have the tools that you want. So, whether it be a core drill or a breaker, we have alternatives that you may not be aware of. So, tell us what you want the tools for, and we'll tell you what we've got.
Sarah Mimner, also part of LFB ISAR, and I am within logistics as well. Definitely the biggest takeaway, even just from sort of your basic training in the military, is your own personal admin. Because going into any situation with UKISAR, if you're not squared away first, you're going to be taking down the rest of the team because your admin's out. Especially in something like logistics, when we mobilise, we have 6 hours to get all of that stuff in those orange boxes, as Dom said, very quickly. But it's that level of coordination, being able to do that quickly. Now, if your bags aren't packed and you're not ready to go and you're still scurrying around 2 hours later, you're going to hinder the team. So wherever I've operated or anywhere the team's going to be operating, first and foremost, yourself. And then once you get there, it's getting squared away with the team. And luckily, I'm brand new into logistics and the team's brilliant. And I'm really looking forward to getting going and seeing what happens. I love a label. Absolutely love a label. I have millions and millions of dry bags, but they're all labelled because in the middle of the night, in the dark, in the mud, in the snow, obviously, that we've just been operating in, if you can actually just see that's my pair of undies, because it's written on a label, you're going to be able to grab them quickly and go, and you can stack all those things in your bag well. So, making your life user-friendly is definitely the key. And if you can get that done really quickly, you end up being able to do things like get the camp ready, start moving forward. But definitely the dry bag and label system's something I'd definitely pass on to everyone. You've got to think about the environments that we're operating in. We're not necessarily going to be operating on a rubble pile, which is sort of your standard USAR operating theatre. Exactly, that's sort of what we train on. We go to the same rubble piles, we do the same sort of exercises, whereas we can physically be operating anywhere in the world. That can be urban, that can be very rural. You look at the deployments they've had before, Nepal, temperature dropped. They are working in environments that are ever changing. So the ability to cope in those environments just through basic survival is massive. And I think a big part of what we've done here is we've learned as individuals how we cope best. So that's, we've different sleeping methods. What works for you? You might be a a sleep in a hammock person, or you might be a sleep in a den on the floor person. You know what's most comfortable for you. So when we go into those environments, you can get sorted straight away, get your head down for a few hours and then keep moving. Super valuable working in all of these different training environments, so that when we actually do go into live theatres, we're on the front foot. This is absolutely brilliant. It is brand new. It's state of the art. It's everything we need. It's super Gucci. It's super white walls. Yeah. You just know these white walls. I'm going to stay this white for a while. It is
gym facility as well. We just smashed the workout.
Great gym facility. I'm pretty sure I did. No, it's perfect for what we need in terms of we're able to get out here, we're able to learn. There's lots of different theatres you can work in here. I mean, John, the director here, has created more objects to work on than I have ever seen. He has been just a complete driving force as well this week. His passion and enthusiasm has made, just the first couple of days we were all blown away by how excited he was. He was absolutely brilliant in the field as well, because you just see all that passion and knowledge, and you just know that he's going to get everybody going before we've even actually had a bit of food, because he's just so excited to be there. But in terms of actually operating here and what we can do, the scope is huge, and having a facility that we get minus 15 here in the winter, and in the summer you're looking 30 degrees plus. That gives us so much scope for so many different scenarios, and you just kind of think going forward it's going to be a really good partnership for us.
David Searle from Merseyside Fire and Rescue Service. Yeah, it's been excellent so far. A wide range of topics covered to do with cold weather. Lots of navigation, wide area searching, learning how to build a fire and how to maintain a fire. I found navigation most difficult, to be honest, because I'm pretty fresh to that. So yeah, I could find myself getting lost potentially while I was trying to survive. But no, firelighting spot on, building the shelter. That was great as well. The first night I was very cold, and that was down to my personal admin. I just hadn't organised my sleeping arrangement correctly, and I ended up very, very cold, so I got up early and just sat next to the fire. In Greece, you've got to stay on top of your hydration here as well, but in Greece you are sweating all day, so even more so in Greece I'd say. You're thinking more about keeping the sun off your face. You're thinking about that all day. When you are going on long treks out there as well, you've got to be mindful of the fact that if your transport doesn't show up on time, you are going to be literally stood out in the baking hot sun for hours potentially. So you're thinking about finding shade, stuff like that. Make lists well in advance, pack your bags well in advance. And I'm not saying this as like I'm some expert. I've just made all these mistakes the last couple of months. So yeah. Like out in the hills, out in the snow, it's just nice, and it's not something we're used to. And yeah, I've learned so much, definitely. As I said, navigation, staying warm at night, and the main one for me still is just personal admin, knowing where my bits of kit are and just keeping track.
So my name's Zoe Clift, and I work for Humanity and Inclusion.
Zoe, welcome to our UKISAR deployment. How have you found it so far?
Excellent so far. So we're now a couple of days in. Team's great, learning loads about how UKISAR run and work. So it's, so far a really, really valuable experience.
Now, you're here with, obviously, Humanity and Inclusion. You've been going for like 40 years now. I know you've obviously not been in it for 40 years, but Humanity and Inclusion has been going in for 40 years. I've learned loads about the origins from when it started. I mean, give us the origin from the prosthetics to where you are now, and how incredibly huge this is, and why it's sort of working in alignment with the work that I suppose UKISAR is doing. Yeah,
so I've worked for Humanity and Inclusion for the last couple of years, but it's a long-standing international NGO that started off basically based around Cambodia and Southeast Asia, working with landmine victims and looking at prosthetics, orthotics, rehabilitation, and that being both physical, mental health well-being, and recovering and getting back into society. So not just surviving injury, it's more about having essentially sort of meaning and purpose to life. And then it's grown from there. Again, I don't speak on behalf of the Federation, but now in a huge number of countries, covering things like its traditional origins from rehab, mental health and well-being, social inclusion, advocacy, really for those that are the most vulnerable, and particularly those with disability.
The whole landmine aspect, and when you were talking this afternoon about sort of putting things in place to stop certain types of munitions and whatnot being used in places, because when you and Russ were doing a presentation today, I love the aspect of, Russ described it as after the rubble pile, and I know that's a very loose term, but it really did speak a lot to not how little we think, but the roles of the emergency services, even with an international sense, we're there for the here and now and to try and reduce risk, save life, and try and create peace where there is trauma and emergency, effectively. But there's so little infrastructure traditionally, I suppose, in around what happens next, what's going to happen with these people when we go, and that, I suppose, with the absence of humanitarian inclusion, there was a lot of chaos and vulnerability, a lot of countries that would just descend into some probably traumatic places for people, I suppose.
Yeah, I think the wider humanitarian network, and so those agencies and NGOs and civil society, etc., that work on that combination really of preparedness, advocacy, the example I gave earlier on today about trying to advocate for bans on particular types of munition. That's what HI, in collaboration with other partners, won the Nobel Prize for.
How would they go about navigating something like that? Because to try and put restrictions, it's almost like rules of engagement, for want of a better description, because of the colossal aftermath. Like you say, when the conflict's over, all of these landmines is a wonderful example. And you've actually got teams as well that go and detect that and it's almost like sweep areas so that normal life can continue.
Yeah, so they're not in every program, but specific programs around the world. There's the demining programs, the in-country teams, supported by wider partnerships and in combination with other stakeholders. I think that's one of the things that HI does particularly well, is that it's in-country teams and creating links with other partners. It's not, all about, this is the one thing that HI does. That's the same with that complex problem, and it's about advocacy, it's about shining a light on certain areas. It's, to a certain extent, a lot of the advocacy that people do is in relation to talking at government level, trying to get engagement, trying to just keep things in the public eye as well. So it's I suppose the thing with HI, when we talk about my role, and particularly with the UK emergency medical team, it can seem very clinical, but actually the wider organisation is so broad-reaching. So it's preparedness, advocacy, emergency surge or development sector, and then long-term ongoing programmes. So it's a real mixture.
You said something really impactful this afternoon when I was listening, in around when we see these disaster areas and we see people climb out of the rubble piles, it tends to, and this may sound a biased view from what I'm fed and what we're fed from the media, the males are in there, they're doing things in these organisations. You said a wonderful thing about, think about where are the women? Where are the women in these scenarios? Because most, cultures, an even split-ish, so where are the women? What's the tradition in those parts? Why are these people being cared for as well? What are their welfare needs? And then you said something fantastic about the work that humanitarian inclusion does about keeping girls in schools. I found that fascinating. It might sound obvious, but how do they go about that and creating those links?
Yeah, I'm definitely not the person to speak on that. That's the social inclusion and inclusive education teams, and that there's a whole division of HI that do that. It's not solely girls, it's anybody really, but it tends to be more female focused because there are differences in social inclusion. However, they do focus on those with a disability. So it's basically vulnerable groups that are missing in certain scenarios. And if my familiar topic is emergency medicine, one of the things that we try and particularly push for HI is, in an emergency, people get very focused on the doing and treating and saving. And then when you look back and you think, oh, actually, who are we treating and saving? Who's missing? And it tends to be, like we spoke today about the example of earthquake injury, higher percentage of women and children because they're generally at home. Where they're not out at work in some of these areas, but they're at home and then you look at who's injured and treated. So there's lots of different stats out there, but yeah, for the social inclusion and the inclusive education, I could put you in touch with my colleague Julia, who's.
But it is true, isn't it?
amazing.
We get so blinkered on what we can see and the loud and the screaming and the obvious needs that shout up for that help. I think that's a wonderful lens and perspective to think about what is it we're not seeing here and who is not confident enough or who's not supported enough or who, just because of the tradition of that environment, who's unaccounted for. Because likelihood is if the structure's not there traditionally on a day-to-day life, when local structures, services, organisations and support and welfare fall apart and the threads of that society start to come away, those people are going to fall straight through the gaps and will likely it'll take them even longer to recover from it.
Yeah, and you'll see that in, you know, a lot of people will automatically think, oh, well, that's low to middle income context. If you have a surge emergency, big disaster in a high income setting like the UK, vulnerable people will be at greater risk. It doesn't matter whether you're low income, high income, whatever context, it's the same in those emergency scenarios. And even things like just access and ability to understand that there's an option.
That's where that education piece comes in again, isn't it?
Exactly.
Because a vulnerable person, we think, oh, you mean disability, or you mean this, just socioeconomic vulnerability, the fact their lack of comprehension and ability to access these resources may be simply because they have not been able to benefit from the level of education that a lot of people have.
Yeah, or they, traditionally with disability in some cultures, it's not a acceptable thing and they're shut away. You imagine that in an earthquake scenario, they're never getting out of that building. And likewise with healthcare, if you're not used to being able to access healthcare, no matter how much you want to, you're not going to seek that support. So for search and rescue, say you guys find somebody, search and rescue wise, are they going to naturally think that medical treatment is accessible to them? And is it? So lots of different sections of looking at things with a slightly different lens.
So talk to us about that EMT side of it, because this is becoming a really huge part of what we see one of our correlating benefits of working so closely. What sort of skill sets would you see deployed as part of the UK EMT? Because I think some people see it as first aid bag on the back, plasters, cuts and bruises, dragging people out of the rubble. But these are quite large, complex deployments, even sometimes as long as 3 months. What sort of skill sets are in the team?
So they're really variable. The deployment capabilities are quite flexible from, a full Type 2 field hospital, which is just over 70 staff, and a whole range of surgeons, anaesthetists, nurses of various different descriptions, paramedics, physios, occupational therapists. And, for the UK, that's predominantly from an NHS roster. So these people have their normal NHS job and then they're on call for periods of time. So there's a tendency towards a lean to trauma expertise because that's what you're used to seeing in sudden onset disaster. But certainly over the last 2 to 3 years, it's bolstered with outbreak experience, particularly after, Ebola responses, things like diphtheria, measles, and clearly now COVID.
Exactly, it brings a whole other level to it, doesn't it? As we're moving forward now, what are some of the areas that you see UKISAR working more closely with humanity and inclusion? You're here experiencing one of the many training exercises that UKISAR are involved in. How can you see the greatest efficiencies of working more closely and tying those links? Because so often you are deployed to the same places. Yeah,
I think it's very beginnings of those sorts of conversations. A lot of it will be shared learning. So it's learning from my point of view about how UKISAR works, the systems and processes, and generally learning about how you guys train and then work in the field. And from our side at HI, really giving a broader awareness of the humanitarian perspective, particularly in those circumstances where you're probably deploying into a long-standing, complex humanitarian system that has been established for a while, is functioning, and then you get an emergency surge. So how are you able to link in with other partners on the ground to make it easier for you guys it might be things like, what is the pre-hospital system?
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
Yeah.
What is the normal pre-hospital system? Or if you, on a search and rescue mission, find a lone child, there will be a protection cluster.
Yeah.
And how do you link into that? Rather than be left with a lone child. So
Yeah.
that's where that overlap might be, just as a very early view of being aware of some of those other structures that could mean that you're still able to really focus on what your skills are, but with an awareness of other things that you could link into that streamline some of those challenging issues in complex humanitarian settings.
So we were speaking earlier this afternoon about some of the emerging concerns that are out there, and even though it's an emergency response, so much of it, it's great to see the level of pre-thought that's now going in, because we're seeing, if anybody looks on the disaster awareness sites and things like that, we're seeing a lot of areas that are being hit almost year after year now with the big changes in climate. And you were speaking specifically about, I'm going to get the name wrong, Myanmar,
Yeah.
Thank you. Difficult one, not heard of that before. That is seems to be a really unique place where they are getting hit time and time again, but now they've had quite a quiet period, and you were saying that there's things there that we need to keep our finger on the pulse of, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's the conversation about preparedness. So you'll find on the various different disaster indexes and the vulnerability indexes, there are certain countries that, you're right, get hit time and time again with sudden onset disaster or are at huge risk. Myanmar's one because of a huge fault line, so they're at huge risk for earthquake.
You were saying the geography of it almost runs straight up the centre of the country, is that right?
Yes, yeah, so they're pretty vulnerable, and they have had them in the past, and they're making great steps forward about how they plan when that earthquake happens.
Such a colossal investment from infrastructure, both like healthcare, but also physical structures, and the timeframes in which to try and erect these, even if there is funding available, which often there's not. Yeah,
the funding's interesting, and Myanmar clearly at the moment has its other issues in terms of the political context. I suppose one of the examples you could think of would be Nepal, and how they've progressed over the years with their preparedness and capability for earthquake in particular, or say like the area of Southeast Asia where they get repeatedly hit with storm patterns, and they actually have a great network of neighbouring countries that are very used to supporting each other. And some of that's come from pure need and frequency, and some of that's come from using other countries, say like the UK, to provide a bit of a structure and a framework that they can then take the next step. And that's what I was speaking about in terms of preparedness for earthquake. Yes, there's a lot of focus on the health side, but I'm almost positive there'll be stuff for search and rescue as well.
Working in that sector for quite some time now, I wanted to close by sort of asking, what do you think are the greatest characteristics for somebody that has to operate in such, at times, an emotionally driven, but also the political aspect, and being able to be passionate, but also remain emotionally detached to ensure that you're serving the right people? What are the great characteristics of people that are able to do what you do, and the people that are in humanity and inclusion?
That's a great question. Find that person and profile them.
Yeah.
I think everybody has peaks and troughs. I think certainly from the emergency side, and my colleagues in the emergency division at HI tend to be fairly pragmatic.
Okay.
Some of that comes with experience of knowing that there are going to be lows, highs. Sometimes it'll be very, very quick, rapid, time-pressured, exhausting bits of work, and then there'll be a bit of a down phase. I suppose understanding that doing your best is of huge value. It will not be right every single time. There is no right for most things, and then constantly learning. I think that would be the main thing, is from each of those events, what can you take away, adapt, modify, seek support from different specialists. So that constant role of refresh, learn, move on, make ourselves a bit better and a bit better, which I think matches UKISAR.
That's exactly where we're at the minute. You're on that crest of a wave of so many new people coming into it, trying to take the learnings that's come before and now utilise all of these sort of new conversations and new partnerships with people such as yourself to hopefully create a more sustainable long-term structure to be able to serve the needs of so many people, and those needs seem to only ever grow. So time is now.
Yeah, exactly.
Zoe, thank you.
Cheers.
Sean, Russ, coming to the end of this cold weather training. What are some of your reflections on the training this week, Sean?
So the aim was to come out cold weather training, arduous conditions, something I've never done before, and just look at what sort of outcomes we've got from deployments in the past. Myself deployed to Japan, and surprising to me when I was out there, it snowed. So I wasn't ill prepared, but I could have been better prepared. So having a course like this, testing our capability has been invaluable.
Yeah, we've had a massive amount of seeing how prepared the team are. We've got a lot of new recruits in the team and stuff like that. So now more than ever, it's important that I suppose you're giving people as close to deployable conditions to see how they cope under those conditions. We went through some survival training. How did you find some of the stuff we did out in the woods?
Yeah, it's just getting that teamwork, working out how to survive really in them conditions. Yes, we've got a base of operations on deployment, but if we get stranded, we need to know how to survive just for maybe 12, 24 hours. So being in these conditions, out in the woods, building them fires, camps is just invaluable.
We were lucky to see that they did have a number of 1,000 attempts that you can get through those firelighters, because I think a couple of our members of our team really tested it to the max. Russ, we spoke a little bit about teamwork there. Sean's mentioned how vital that is. Some of that's really been put to the test in how we've seen the team work this week. What have been some examples that have really sort of epitomised what you've seen as great teamwork?
Yeah, just reflecting back, Pete, if I'm totally honest, I think, we've had some wonderful examples from team members that are brand new to the team. We've discussed many times before about, how we, due to the age of some of the operators and technicians within UKISAR, and now obviously retiring, moving on to pastures new. And, we're really excited about the new talent that is coming through, and to see that talent work in this environment in cold weather, arduous conditions, and how they've gelled as a team. One of the things that stick out in my mind is the that first team building acclimatisation exercise. When we looked at the stretchers, and we utilised the assault course here to move a stretcher around in teams that had never met before. And it just epitomises, what a group of like-minded individuals with a real passion to do good, to do the best for international partners during their worst times is amazing. The smiles on the faces, beaming, cold weather conditions, and to see them, tackle some of the challenges of moving, which were pretty big Kosovo.
There was some from the KSF. We had some pretty big fellas that were using.
Oh yes, and it was great to see.